They called her the Bingo Lady behind her back. Families visiting Sunset Manor retirement home would see Sarah Martinez setting up card tables and organizing craft activities, and that's all they thought she was. Someone who helped elderly people pass time with games and art projects. What they didn't know was that Dr. Sarah Martinez had spent 15 years as an Army clinical psychologist, healing the minds of broken soldiers in the most dangerous war zones on Earth. She'd treated over 3,000 cases of PTSD, survived mortar attacks while conducting therapy sessions, and earned a Bronze Star for providing mental health care under enemy fire. And when she noticed the unmistakable symptoms of combat trauma in the veterans at Sunset Manor, she quietly began saving lives all over again. Because sometimes the most important healing happens when people think you're just playing bingo. Sunset Manor Retirement Home, Portland, Oregon. A beautiful facility where families bring their elderly loved ones for care, comfort, and community. The kind of place with manicured gardens, comfortable common areas, and staff members who genuinely care about their residents. Sarah Martinez had been the activities director there for 2 years. Every morning, she'd arrive with supplies for the day's programs, art materials for painting class, music for sing-alongs, game pieces for afternoon bingo. To the visiting families, she was pleasant, professional, and forgettable. Just another staff member making sure their parents and grandparents stayed busy. "Oh, that's just Sarah," family members would say to each other. "She does the activities, keeps them entertained." But Sarah wasn't just keeping anyone entertained. She was observing, analyzing, using skills that she'd developed over 15 years of military service to identify something that everyone else was missing. You see, Sunset Manor housed 47 residents. 12 of them were military veterans, men and women who'd served in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And Sarah had noticed something that the medical staff, the families, and even the veterans themselves hadn't recognized. These weren't just elderly people dealing with normal aging issues. Her first deployment was to Iraq in 2005, during some of the heaviest fighting of the war. Sarah found herself treating soldiers who were seeing things no human being should see, doing things that would haunt them forever, losing friends in ways that defied explanation. But it wasn't just the soldiers who needed help. Sarah discovered that she had a gift for reaching people in crisis, for finding the words that could pull someone back from the edge of complete psychological breakdown. She could sit in a tent while mortars were falling outside and help a 19-year-old kid process the fact that he'd just lost his best friend to an IED. Over 15 years, Sarah served 4 deployments across Iraq and Afghanistan. She treated everything from acute stress reactions to severe PTSD, from combat exhaustion to survivor's guilt. She'd conducted therapy sessions in bunkers during rocket attacks, provided crisis counseling in field hospitals while wounded soldiers were being treated 10 feet away, and developed techniques for mental health care that could literally save lives in the most extreme circumstances. The Bronze Star had come after a particularly bad day in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. A convoy had been hit by a roadside bomb, and several soldiers were trapped in a vehicle that was taking sniper fire. Sarah had crawled through enemy fire to reach the wounded, not to treat their physical injuries, but to keep them psychologically stable while the rescue was underway. One soldier was going into shock from panic. Another was catatonic from trauma. Sarah had talked them through the worst moments of their lives while bullets were flying overhead. When she left the Army in 2018, Sarah was one of the most experienced combat psychologists in military history. She could diagnose PTSD from across a room, recognize flashback triggers that other professionals would miss, and provide therapeutic interventions that worked when everything else failed. But civilian life had been harder than she'd expected. The pace was too slow. The problems seemed trivial. and she missed the sense of purpose that came from saving lives under pressure. That's when she'd found Sunset Manor. Working with elderly people wasn't the same as combat psychology, but it was meaningful work with people who'd lived full lives and had stories to tell. But Sarah noticed things that others missed. The way Frank's hands would shake when someone dropped something loud in the kitchen. How he'd position his chair so he could always see the exits. The fact that he never talked about his time in Vietnam, not even when other veterans shared war stories. These weren't signs of dementia. These were signs of hypervigilance, avoidance behaviors, and emotional numbing. Classic PTSD symptoms that Frank had been carrying for 50 years. Then there was Margaret Chen, an Army nurse who'd served in Korea. Margaret's family thought she was just becoming antisocial as she aged, preferring to stay in her room rather than participate in group activities. But Sarah recognized what was happening. Margaret was experiencing what psychologists call delayed onset PTSD, trauma symptoms that emerge or worsen later in life when other stressors pile up. And James Rodriguez, a Gulf War veteran who'd been having bad dreams that kept him awake at night. The medical staff had prescribed sleeping pills, but Sarah knew that medicating the symptoms without addressing the underlying trauma would never work. Over several months, Sarah began documenting what she was seeing. 12 veterans, displaying various combinations of PTSD symptoms that had gone undiagnosed for years or decades. Some had been treated for depression or anxiety, but none had received proper trauma-focused therapy. The problem was that Sarah was supposed to be an activities director, not a therapist. She had no official authority to provide psychological treatment, and the families and medical staff weren't exactly asking for her professional opinion about mental health issues. But Sarah couldn't just ignore what she was seeing. These were veterans who'd served their country and were now suffering in silence, carrying burdens that didn't have to be carried alone. So she started small. It began during craft time. Sarah had noticed that Frank Kowalski seemed more relaxed when his hands were busy, so she started bringing projects that required focus and fine motor control. Model airplanes, detailed coloring books, small woodworking projects. While Frank worked, Sarah would ask gentle questions. Not therapy questions, just friendly conversation. "That's a beautiful P-51 Mustang, Frank. Did you ever see planes like that when you were in Vietnam?" Slowly, carefully, Sarah began creating a space for Frank to talk about his experiences. "Sometimes forgetting isn't the answer," Sarah replied. "Sometimes we need to find a way to carry those memories without letting them carry us." Frank looked up at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah could see recognition in his eyes. Not recognition of her face, but recognition of someone who understood what he was talking about. "You military?" Frank asked. "Army," Sarah replied. 15 years, Iraq and Afghanistan. "You ever lose anybody?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, Frank. I lost people too." That's when Frank started talking, really talking, about Vietnam, about the friends he'd lost, about the sounds that still woke him up at night 50 years later. Sarah listened with the professional ear of someone who'd heard similar stories thousands of times, but she responded with the personal understanding of someone who'd walked similar paths. Word spread quietly among the veterans, not through official channels, but through the informal network that exists among people who've served. Sarah was military. Sarah understood. Sarah could be trusted. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult afternoon in November. James Rodriguez had been having severe nightmares for 3 weeks straight, and the medical staff was considering transferring him to a psychiatric facility because his sleep disruption was affecting other residents. Sarah found James in the common room at 2 in the morning, sitting alone and staring out the window. She'd been staying late to work on the next day's activities, but this was more important than any craft project. "Can't sleep again?" she asked, settling into the chair next to him. James looked at her with exhausted eyes. "They want to send me somewhere else. Think I'm losing my mind." "Are you losing your mind?" "I don't know, maybe. I keep seeing things that happened 25 years ago like they're happening right now. Smell diesel fuel and hear helicopters that aren't there. Jump every time a car backfires. James's voice was flat, defeated. My family thinks I'm just getting old and confused. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, James, what was your MOS in the Gulf? MOS, Military Occupational Specialty. The question that told James exactly who he was talking to. Combat engineer, James replied. Cleared mines and IEDs. How many devices did you clear? Couple hundred, maybe more. That night, in the quiet common room of Sunset Manor, Sarah Martinez began doing what she'd done hundreds of times before in field hospitals and forward operating bases. She began healing a warrior's mind. Sarah's unofficial therapy sessions with the veterans continued for several months. She was careful to work within the boundaries of her official role, but she was also providing specialized care that none of these men and women had ever received. Frank Kowalski was sleeping through the night for the first time in 50 years. Margaret Chen had started participating in group activities again. James Rodriguez's nightmares had decreased from every night to maybe once a week. The families noticed the improvements, but attributed them to better medical care or simply settling into the facility. The medical staff was pleased, but didn't ask too many questions about what had changed. Everything might have continued quietly if not for Janet Rodriguez, James's daughter, who arrived for an unexpected visit on a Tuesday evening in March. Janet found her father in the activities room, not playing bingo or doing crafts, but sitting in a circle with 5 other residents, talking about something intense and personal. Sarah was facilitating the conversation with the kind of professional skill that Janet had only seen from her father's doctors. "Dad?" Janet interrupted. "What's going on here?" James looked up at his daughter with clearer eyes than she'd seen in months. "Jenny, this is Dr. Martinez. She's been helping us." "Dr. Martinez?" Janet looked at Sarah in confusion. "I thought you were the activities director." "I am," Sarah replied, "but I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist. I spent 15 years in the Army treating combat PTSD. Janet felt the world shift slightly. "You're a real doctor?" "Army trained, civilian licensed, with 15 years of field experience and combat trauma." Sarah's voice was calm, professional. "Your father and the other veterans here were displaying symptoms of untreated PTSD. I've been providing some informal therapeutic support." "Informal?" Janet's voice was rising. "You've been treating my father without telling us? Without permission?" Sarah remained calm. "I've been talking with veterans about their experiences, the same way I talked with..." Instead, Dr. Wells looked at Sarah's credentials, reviewed the documented improvements in the veterans' conditions, and asked a single question. "Dr. Martinez, would you be interested in officially expanding your role here to include psychological services for our veteran residents?" The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, Sarah had established a formal PTSD treatment program at Sunset Manor. Word spread to other facilities, and she began consulting on veteran mental health care throughout the state. Frank Kowalski, who hadn't talked about Vietnam for 50 years, began volunteering to speak at schools about his military service. Margaret Chen reconnected with her family and started participating in community veteran events. James Rodriguez became a peer counselor for other veterans struggling with similar issues. The families who had once dismissed Sarah as just the activities lady now understood that she had been providing specialized care that their loved ones had needed for decades. Today, Dr. Sarah Martinez runs the Veterans Mental Health Program at Sunset Manor, treating not just residents but veterans from throughout the community. The woman who was once called the Bingo Lady is now recognized as one of the leading experts in geriatric combat trauma. But she still organizes craft activities, Because sometimes healing happens when people think you're just playing games. Sometimes the most important work is done by people whose real qualifications are hidden in plain sight. The next time you see someone in what seems like a simple job, a teacher, a janitor, an activities director, remember Sarah Martinez, because you never know what kind of expertise, experience, and healing ability might be hiding behind a name tag and a friendly smile. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear craft aprons. And sometimes they save lives one conversation at a time, one veteran at a time, one moment of understanding at a time. Thank you for watching The Human Stories. If this moved you, please share it. Hit subscribe. And remember, the people who seem ordinary might be the most extraordinary of all.